Guys, so today we're talking about Chelsie Kryst, and I just wanted to do my hair like really cool or whatever. So Chelsie Kryst's mother published a book that was by Chelsie, and she didn't get an opportunity to publish her book. She unfortunately met her in um, she um, self-concluded, which I really don't like using that term, but she met her in. I mean, due to severe depression, and I've been doing research and I looked into things spiritually. I even looked at some psychics who are really like prominent psychics in our community, and like many don't believe that she ended things, but I think that she did. So I'm one of the people who I do have um, different abilities, and from what I can see, she did, but she was pushed to. And so, like, there's a part of her that doesn't resonate that she did this to herself spiritually. So now, moving out of that, the book, I believe, is something that she written and she was planning to write. But I feel like she just, just didn't have the time. And I want to talk about depression, um, those who in their life in the Black community, trauma and NPD, which is narcissistic personality disorder, and abuse that victims in our community, like what they endure and like why it often leads to individuals ending things. I also want to talk about like what I've dealt with concerning depression, anxiety, and what I've dealt with concerning the people in my family and people at work who have NPD or at least are very narcissistic, and how it's made me feel like I just want to disappear, and having to check those things within myself, like whatever traits I may have within myself, so that I'm not being toxic or being anything like the people that have caused me harm. So I want to get to the point of what really played a role in Chelsie ending things in part one before I purchase the book and I read what's written, because Chelsie isn't here to publish her own story. So her mom's telling the story, and I speculate that there's things that have been deliberately left out. I feel like the father, he came out around the time that she ended things and mentioned that a lot of what led to her depression was family dysfunction. And so that, coupled with online bullying, coupled with a breakup, coupled with her contract ending with Miss USA, having to move out of her apartment, her salary going from six figures to less than six figures, so going from like 150 or 200,000 a year to about 65,000 a year. So I did a lot of research to see all the lifestyle changes and all the cycles that were happening and accumulating at like really would seem like one point in time for her, right at the time where she just decided to end things. Okay, so this is a tough subject, and I don't know, I look like I didn't really want to have the flowers or headscarf, but it's a bit of my style, so let's just stick with it. So anyway, so she worked as an extra host, and like extra hosts really only make about 30 an hour, and so you're filming on set for 8 hours in a day. So on average you're making about 60,000. And for someone with her accolades, someone with a law degree, someone who is a high profile person with coming with a six-figure salary and going into much less. And then, there's some things with her law degree, like she was able to finish school, but she did leave law, because there were some things that just wasn't resonating with her, some things that she may haven't that she didn't really like prepare for. So um you know, a lot of these things happening. Then she was in a relationship with someone who cheated on her right around the time that she won Miss USA. So like a lot of things have been was basically just piling up on her. Okay. So when you're already dealing with someone who has severe depression, um, let me put it this way. My anxiety is so fucking bad that some if it's not managed properly, especially during an intense time in my life, it will, like, my PTSD and my anxiety will go into, I'll start going into a bit of psychosis. So imagine everything accumulating so poorly and just like all these terrible things happening around the retrograde in her life. Um, and, her having to shift her lifestyle and kind of face the people that are telling her, like, no, we've invested in your career, we invested in your livelihood, you have to measure up to XYZ, on top of not really feeling like well in a toxic environment where people not only discriminate against her because of her ethnicity, but not being able to assimilate because she is someone who has curly hair, and like she's someone who has a mixed background. So not being able to really assimilate in the white spaces that she occupied, on top of her family looking at her like she's the prize and she has to stand up and kind of be a certain role model. And um, those things, if you have stability at home, if you have someone in a corner that's like, yo, if you don't measure up to XYZ, you're still loved. If you don't get your degree, or if you fall back on things, you're still loved. Like, if you don't have someone like that, it's very hard to cope with the toxicity and narcissism at work. Okay, because we all deal with it, like in the workplace. But when you don't have that support at home because you have a parent that has NPD, or you have some type of dysfunction going on at home, then it will lead you to, it's debilitating, and it will lead you to not want to be here. So let's talk about it. So like New York is fucking expensive. So like we all know that Chesley wanted to change from law to, working in fashion and marketing. But it's very hard to get a good salary in the beginning doing that. And I felt like it wasn't good enough. What she was doing wasn't good enough for whomever the person in her family or in her close circle had NPD, who really wanted her to be, this great thing, even though she's accomplished so much. Keep in mind that a lot of those accomplishments were to appease whomever was in her corner that put her in that space. And when you live your life for other people, whether it's a parent or anyone, it drains the living, like your soul. It drains your soul. And when you turn 30, or you get close to that age, between 27 and like 35, you go through this cycle where you start to awaken to who you are and you start to heal past trauma. And when people see the change, if they're toxic, they get scared, and so they start to be more aggressive or withdraw. For example, the parent with NPD didn't speak to me, did the silent treatment in my own life for some time when I dropped out of college. So all that withdrawal, it nearly like killed me, and I survived. But it was because of this attachment. It was because of not getting proper therapy, and not and measuring my own worth to whatever standards my parent that has the NPD had. And so when I felt like I failed them, it brought me down. So could you imagine being of someone to her stature, right? And then wanting to change, but people not wanting her to be something different because they see it as less than. Okay. So being like, here's something that I want to really convey. It's hard for me to really understand how difficult it is for people who have certain accolades and who are occupying what I call white spaces. Um, it's hard for me to kind of understand how difficult it is for them, because I like to be in multicultural spaces. I like to be around people of different ethnicities. I like to be enmeshed in, you know, a diverse neighborhood and community. But there are people that want to strive and be, like, politicians, lawyers. They want to have like a higher profile, and there's some spaces where there's less people of color, and if there are people of color, they're fully assimilated into Eurocentric standards. So we all deal with it, and it's manageable if you want to get to those higher places in society. It is manageable to deal with the bullying and the narcissistic abuse that you'll endure and the targeting. Being a person of color in those spaces is manageable when you have people at home that support you. But when you have people at home that tell you to get over shit, that tell you that they had it worse, when you have people at home that's not supportive, it's debilitating. It's really, really hard to have the type of like inner peace and work, like, and around these toxic energies as a person of color. So I do believe that she self-concluded. I do think it could have something to do with her dealing with narcissistic abuse at work and even at home. I wouldn't have drawn this conclusion if her father didn't come out and say that there was family dysfunction. But because he did, I drew the conclusion. I've dealt with NPD. I'm still dealing with it. It's very hard. These people, they do come from a world of trauma, and they cause family units to break down. They cause individuals to self-annihilate, or in themselves. They cause just more and more trauma. So better to be distant. But because, especially when it's a mother, the child is very attached. So like, there's a theory, and I'm not going to say that this is the case, but there's a theory that Chelsie, mom has an MPD, and she pushed her to be this pageant winner, wanted her to be, everything that she wanted to be, and maybe she couldn't do it because of the time, because of racism, whatever the case may be. We know that her mom's a pageant winner, but what I'm getting at is that she wasn't as accomplished as Chelsie, and I think she pushed Chelsie to be extremely accomplished, because this is the time where we can, and break down doors. This is a time where we have more like opportunities. We, as in people of color, like, we can actually get to the highest levels. But in the 80s and the 70s and stuff like that, that wasn't necessarily the case. And even in the early 90s, that wasn't necessarily the case. So yeah, so we should talk about how it is in those spaces. And there are people who will be extremely racist and try and silence you and target you. And these people are so high profile and intimidating that if you challenge them, it could ruin your life. And there are also people in this world who they feel like if there's a person of color that has accolades, or if there's a person of color who may have it easier because they're multi-ethnic or they have a closer proximity to whiteness, there are people in our community that will target people like Chesley, and just kind of, uh, not validate whatever pain she's going through because of jealousy, hate, self-hate, whatever. So I feel like there's enough there to conclude that she probably did have a breakdown and ended things. I feel like that's enough to conclude that, yeah, she actually did end things because she had a breakdown. So what do we do? You know, I hope the book really touches on the family dysfunction that was mentioned. I hope that the book helps young people and even older people to really deal with the trauma in their own family, and especially in the Black community. I feel like there's a lot of people in my community who just don't think that she did this to herself because they're like, you know, number one, she's so achieved and she could do so much, so why would she want to end things? Because they're attributing her success and her wealth to her worth. They're attributing her success and her wealth to her happiness. And again, for the final time, money does not make you happy. Accolades and a degree and a certificate does not bring inner peace. These things do not help in that manner. So when we collectively in our community decide that our worth and our value should be attributed to our inner being and what we do with our hands and why we do the things we do with our hands, then I think we will be better off. But until we continue to be superficial, and it's not just Black people, it's people all over. And I'm not saying everybody's like this, but we got problems in our community. And don't target me for mentioning it when I've dealt with it. And I still deal with it today. What's the point of targeting me when we can just simply have a conversation about it? It's not just an issue of mental illness. It's not like, oh, she's depressed. It's a matter of targeting bullying in the Black community, narcissistic abuse, and our society as a whole, and how we deal with mental health.